Hi, and welcome back. Thanks for joining us on this ever-deepening journey into the source life, source culture. In source science, where we gain access to the missing, emerging source code that takes us into the fundamental field of reality. In our last meditation, it was quite a bit of voltage, and I hope you had a chance to experience it and absorb it and metabolize it and make sense of it and raise questions about it, I hope. Because I was suggesting some powerful, astounding results that have been emerging for centuries and backed up by our great spiritual wisdom, enlightenment traditions through the ages. And we ended with this visual, this meditative visual. And again, just to remind us, as I speak, we're seeking to enter into the source space that's been emerging all through our evolutionary drama through the centuries. And we can't talk about it. I hope you begin to see that. We can't tell, our storytelling, right, has been in the space of what we call the smother board. We talk about it. Talking about it and giving information. This story is different. It's not more information. It's getting out of the information box to the source of all information, the source code. The source of all scriptures, the source of all stories and words and worlds and narratives and ideologies and scripts. That's what the source is. The source is the infinite source and the infinite word. And the infinite word is the source of all words and all narratives and all perspectives and all worldviews. So wherever you stand in life, or whatever space you are, you're in the space of the infinite word, the infinite source. And we don't have to use God words, God names, first names. Whether it's Allah or Yahweh or Om or Tao or Buddha nature or Dharma or Tao, whatever name we don't have to use, or Logos or Sophia, we don't have to use God-sounding names. Logos is not. Logos is a Greek word for the light of reason, the light of the word, the source of intelligence and awareness, of reason. Sophia, infinite wisdom, embodiment, the feminine principle embodying wisdom in the human condition, in our existence itself. That's living wisdom, Sophia. And philosophy is love of Sophia. Philosophia, lover of Sophia, lover of wisdom. And so the quest for first philosophy, ancient quest across the planet, Buddha is a first philosopher, trying to get to the first field, the fundamental field of reality and truth and science and well-being and being, the quest for being. That's another way of putting it. The quest for reality. Being is reality. And the quest for being is a quest for the language, the code of reality. Because our greatest passion and concern and interests and self-interest of survival and thrival is to get in touch with our being. Touch reality as it really is. That's what knowledge, science, reason truly is, to be in touch directly, intimately with reality. Because if we're cut off from reality, then we're in trouble. So first philosophy, that great noble tradition, the science of all science, inaugurated by Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. Aristotle called out in the Greek tradition, first philosophy is the science of being. And why is that first? Because all comes out. Being sources all. Obviously. To be a constitution is to be. To be a human is to be. To be moral is to be. To be beautiful is to be. To be good, whatever it is to be. So everywhere we turn in our culture, it comes from being. So what's the code of being? That's first philosophy or deep ontology. Ontology is another word for first science. And in the classical Greek tradition, I'm just rehearsing back to our opening meditation. Just remember when we speak of source science or the source code, this is huge. Because first philosophy got derailed along the way. And with the rise of empirical science, what we call science today, in the last 300 years, 3 centuries, of the birth of empirical, let's check it, let's experiment. Let's check it out with our senses. Let's do the lab work. Let's corroborate it. With the rise of scientific method and the power of scientific method as a way of getting at truth and facts, experimentally, to verify and corroborate, that's huge. And that somehow seemed to eclipse first philosophy. and leave it behind. And so first philosophy, allegedly the queen of the sciences, the science of all science, got somehow pushed aside to the rise of modern empirical science. But so how dare we speak of source science? Is that empirical science? Is it in sync with, well, it's not separate from it, but we need to really recognize that first philosophy, deep ontology, the science of being, has not gone away. It's a whole Buddha tradition. It's the first philosopher. Buddha is saying we're suffering and we need to end it. And his enlightenment was a magnificent, historic, global event for humanity, the breakthrough into enlightenment, to see into the deep source of reality, out of the boxes where we live and die and suffer. And Buddha saw medically. So first science, deep ontology, is medical ontology. Buddha is a medicine person because human beings are suffering. When we're suffering in our mental spaces, in our mental practices. Then we can't even see them because our mental practices are what give us the power to see and make sense and process reality and world and have experience. And that's how we metabolize our world. But it could be covering up reality. And that's what Buddha saw, is that our dominant mental practices create mental disorders, which is that we can't see more deeply. We get obsessed with our stories and our narratives and with the technology that we don't even know we're using. That's what's remarkable about the journey into first philosophy. That human evolution and cognitive development and word and development and rational development and the power to use words and our lens of the mind and to process and metabolize experience and the data that hits us from all sides, inside and out, within me and around me and in the environment and the cosmos. How do we process it? We develop a lens, we develop word power, technologies to make sense of it, put it together and describe it and narrate and talk about it and communicate about it. That's word power, but that's information. And that has been so successful. Word power, talk about it, narrative power, to tell stories and describe it and develop theories and explanations and cultivate reason to that level and have a logic and to have that level of scientific philosophy is huge development. But what Buddha saw is that our implant, the deeply implanted motherboard, it's the mental programs that we're using, because Buddha saw that we are as we mind. And if we're using a certain technology and got stuck and think it's the ultimate technology to make yourself an entity and to talk about it, and not realize that there are medical consequences of that. And that's why we suffer. So Buddha got that. And in the Eastern Buddha tradition, the yoga tradition of Eastern wisdom, samsara is a diagnostic of an existential cycle of self-violence and alienation from being that causes human suffering. Samsara. And the whole point of medical research and deep source science is to cross to be liberated, moksha, freed from the bondage and slavery of being caught in that technology that we don't even see, to begin to see it more deeply with science. Source science enables us to see what we couldn't see before when we're lodged within certain mental programs that generate breakdown and fragmentation and human disintegration. So Buddha is a medicine person in first philosophy and first science. And Jesus is the first philosopher and scientist. I am the way, the truth, the life. And if we're living in sin, which is another word in the biblical tradition, sin is being severed and cut off from access to God, to the source reality, to what is first. And the birthing of the Judaic tradition as God, Yahweh, is calling out to Abraham and to Israel, love me first, put me first. Why? Because that's an axiom of first. First has to be firsted. And if we're using a sub-first, a derivative technology of me-centered, monocentric language and thought and reason, from my point of view and my lens, we may be privileging our perspective and our word power over the infinite word. And so the scientific journey is a call of the infinite word to script up to the source, the code of God, the code of Yahweh, the code of Allah. And all of Muhammad is surrender to Allah. What? That's an axiom of science. Surrender to what is first. That's first science. So all of the theologies, whether you're using Yahweh talk or God talk or Christ talk or Allah talk, Om talk, Tao, Buddha, they're all first scientists. But we haven't really, all of these great pioneers and traditions, magnificent Enlightenment traditions, are all pointing to the source and trying to get the tools and to upgrade our language power and our mind power and our rational capacities to be able to get the code to enter into first, and we can't talk about it. That's why the story we're doing now is not to just talk more about it. We can't presume and buy into that. That's what we've been doing. We want to interrupt and disrupt that deeply entrenched habit of automatically using our word where we're familiar, our familiar word processing and mind processing and interpretation processing and making sense of things processing, and our rational habits, right, are so powerful and deep. Where everything we hear, we put it into our space. And that needs to be paused, step back, disrupted, interrupted. And that's what our journey is. And that's why I'm just prefacing these 11 meditations of a journey into source, the journey into first science, and really trying to show that first science has not gone away. It may have been derailed in certain ways along the way because we lost our way within this motherboard. We can't get first science within this motherboard. That's why it was disrupted or derailed. And that's really what first science brings out. And if the greatest focus and call of human intelligence and rational journey is the quest for being, and for primary being of ourselves, for our primary being, because when we tap our primary self, our primary being, reality, in its deepest primacy, and we need a code for that. Our adolescent codes are not good enough or strong enough with enough voltage and capacity to handle the unified field of the source. So the missing source code is what we've been journeying, is once we got the missing source code, that our great history has been leading up to seeing that, to get that. Our great pioneers across the planet have been trying to open up the portals into the source code, to get the DNA of reality, of the primal field. And we've been seeing its unum pluribus, the infinite unum. We ended our last meditation with this visual. And so just to wrap up that opening meditation as we get warmed up, we're just limbering up. We're just trying to get limbered up for back on track again into this. Let's go deeper now. And we're seeking in this meditation. So when I use the word meditation, I'm not talking about meditation in this space. You can't meditate here. Meditation is going here. Meditation is opening up the unum space. So meditation is not to talk about it, it's to share the journey into source. Because when you go into source code, it's not talking about it from the outside, it's entering and surfing it from within, because we're part of that flow, and enter into that deep flow. That's our journey. And that's why this journey, I'm suggesting, the deepest quest of humanity for first primary being, and the DNA of being, the grammar of being, the code of the word, the infinite word, the source code. And the source code is not a code that we talk about as an ordinary code. We are the code. When we tap our code, our I am, when we enter the I am, we are coding. We are the code. We're one with the code. We come from the code. And that's our logosapient nature. We're logosapiens, a logos code, when we tap it. Again, we don't have to use God words, because all of our God words obviously come from the infinite name, the infinite word. So we could use more ecumenical language of science and reason and logic. First philosophy is the space out of which our great theologies. So if we call Yahweh, if we call Allah, if we call Buddha nature, which is attempting to break away from the God names into a name for the field, scientifically. Om. And Brahman. We don't have to use God names or take the path of what we call in some other words, spirituality. Some of us may be turned off by spirituality or religion. That's okay, because source science is deeper. And all of our downloads of religious life and spiritual practices and so forth, including scientific, all of our practices, whatever they may be, are coming out of the source. We're all in this together. There's no one can step outside and say, outside of the source code. And that's why, in a way, analogically, that if we can get the DNA, so to speak, for the structure of reality at the deepest level, source reality, then we will have the code of all codes, the script of all scripts. We'll be in the deep word, in the deep rational space. That's been the quest of our great gifted minds and geniuses all through the ages, enlightenment, spiritual breakthroughs, and wisdom teachings. So please remember, this meditation is not a narrative to talk about it and give a theory and describe, but to really move into the space, to access in the first person. We want to enter together. So it's a journey together. So I really appreciate your willingness to work with me and join me in this journey, this narrative journey, not storytelling, but so the greatest story cannot be told in ordinary ways. That's ironic. The greatest story, which is the emergence of source code, first science, the encounter with reality, with presence, infinite presence. I hope we got that. First science is ultimate encounter with the source. And the source is infinite unum. And infinite unum is infinite unum pluribus. All of the diversity possible within the universe, at all kinds, and every kind of diversity is coming with the unum. The unum is filled. The infinite unum is filled with vast diversity connected in this double bracket. So double bracket, as we see over and over, I hope it's getting more familiar and more user-friendly. Double bracket simply means it's a sign to remind us that we're here. We're not talking about, you can't talk about double brackets here. If you try to talk about the double brackets in this space, you're blowing it. If you try to put the God name here, it's not going to work. Down in this space, that's cut off from the source. So source science, first science, it may have been derailed because it was packaged here. You can't put first science in here. If you try to do that and get first science and get a narrative here, you're losing it. Buddha got that. Buddha saw that we've got to leave this to enter into the Buddha space. That's source science, medical ontology, being. Ontology is being. And if we're cut off from being, we're going to suffer because we're going to be desourced. Yoga got this. Yoga. So if we're doing yoga here, I'm doing my yoga practice, and no one ever showed me that there is a smother board that the yoga technology is designed to overcome and take us into the Om space. Yoga is here. Yoga is entering the Om space. It's a practice that takes us deeper and deeper into the yoga space, where the self opens up and drops this technology. So an axiom to start up yoga is the quieting of this mental practice of thinking. Thinking here is not the same as thinking here. Meditative thinking is not predicative thinking. They're two technologies. And what we are so implanted with, this predicative, talk about it, narrative space, this is a great technology of information. Let's get the information. Tell me about yoga. I want to practice my yoga. Or I want to tell me about Jesus. Give me the gospel. Give me the news. Because I want to know Jesus. I believe in Jesus when Jesus is speaking here and saying, follow me. I am the way. So these are first medical Buddha, Krishna, showing that we've got to go. And yoga technology is deep science. It is showing how to let go of this smotherboard so that you can come into the open Om space, the Om sphere. That's this journey from this space into the awakened, flourishing being. So it's when we are intimate with being and in communion with being that we flourish. And our humanity as Om sapiens, Logo sapiens, Sophia sapiens begins to blossom in our being. So that's well-being. So here, one of the main points we saw last time is to be cut off from source, is to suffer in all kinds. This is a place of suffering and pathologies, generically. I'm just rehearsing some of the themes. So again, the main point is, when I'm speaking, I'm not seeking to give you information. I'm speaking to create a space, a transformative space, a meditative space. Just step back from being here, just step back and cross into awareness and awaken this code that's within us all. The source code is within each of us. And it's been eclipsed and stifled and blocked by the dominance of our culture codes that we grew up with. And now it seemed innocuous and fine. What's a problem? But our great teacher saw it is a problem. Because a dominant culture codes the way we make sense of the world and the information technology that dominates, because it's so great, it's been so successful, it held us here. And our great teachers, medical ontologists, so we've got to notice and see more deeply, step back and look more deeply into the science of the human condition here. In our narrative lives, the level of word and reason and arts and sciences and education and politics and human rights and everything we're doing here, great as it is still blocked and cut off. And our journey into the source, into who we are truly, is a meditative journey. So meditation is a technology of breaking this barrier, breaking free of this colonized bondage to the space and crossing into the awakened, open, dialogue, I thou, intimate encounter with being in the first person, where we can't talk about it, but we're manifesting it in our life and in our experience and in our rational awareness and cognition. So just remember then let's build on it. Let's build on this theme and try to bring it to conclusion, because as I promised at the end of the last session, and this is our 12th journey together, we suggested that when you step out of trying to diagnose the human condition here, so here's the point, that this line is not just something new, it's representing a rift between culture and human life and a human existence and development here, and crossing a barrier into a deeper space. And whether you call it sin, what is sin? Sin is severance from source. What is samsara? It's another way of diagnosing. It's a human existence that is cut off and repeating certain cycles. Yes, the code. It repeats the code of severance and keeps the suffering going on and on. It's a different narrative about the being cut off from the source, being desourced. So in a way, to be able to say from source science medically that if you could step back from source, double bracket lens, the lens of global reason, and the capacity to look into and see this program of culture and life and the human condition here. We can't see it here. We can't, because we see here. We see with this, and we can't see this. We have to step back. And that's where source science becomes absolutely vital for our human well-being. And gives us a capacity in terms of medical ontology and the lens and diagnostic. We can diagnose this situation from source, the unum pluribus lens. And that's what we're seeking to do, and listen to the great wisdom and scriptures of our tradition that have been seeking alternative strategies to help humans wake up to the fact that we're cut off and that we need to cross over. And it's a big deal how we're going to do that, to shed this. It's like a dying. So that infamous, you got to die to be born, is a severe way of source science, medical ontology, to saying it's going to feel like a death, to give up your story and your cultural identity and everything that's made you who you are. You're identified with that. The practice of identity identifies with its story. My narrative is me. That's who I am. Don't ask me to give up who I am. How can I shed who I am in order? Well, that's exactly the path of maturation as a rational, awakened logo-sapien. So what we're doing in this meditation is to go deeper, because that's a lot to absorb, to hear this, that you don't take this lightly. Being cut off and desourced is the generic medical cause of all kinds of suffering. And in the last meditation, we saw, wow, if my culture and life is going on here, this is my word processing, and this is my mind and my lens, and my tools of interpretation. These are my rational tools of interpreting my existence and making sense. This is my culture. This is where I have meaning and truth and beliefs. And and it gives me the capacity, my language, my cultural language and code gives me the capacity to have a mental life and mental states, and to turn on the lights and make sense of things, to know the facts and what is true. It's all here. And this is important because what we're suggesting at the last, diagnostically using source science. Okay, again, the theme is that source science is vital, and it may have been derailed temporarily by the dominance of this motherboard, but it's still the deepest quest of our greatest scriptures and enlightenment wisdom teachings is to get to the source. This is being. Being is here. The infinite word is being, is space, is time, it's spirit, it's matter, it's meaning, it's truth, it's goodness, it's love. All of that, that's here in the Unam, infinite Unam. And I've suggested, so what is the key factor that changes the game? It's that if we try to do first philosophy or my theology or my religious life here, or read scriptures here, and we use God here, or Allah here, or Yahweh here, or Moses here, Abraham here, Buddha here, yoga, whatever it is, if I'm doing science is here, if I'm living here, then I'm not getting the force of the infinite Unam. And therefore the Unam lens is not there. What is the big deal? Well, Unam, I'm using the Latin, just to get away from unity. Because we speak of unity. We can say, oh, we're all one. All of these religions are true. We can easily say we should know unity, but this unity is not the same as infinite unity. The infinite unity is Unam, infinite Unam. That's the game changer of source science. And that's where the code of deep reason, the Logos code, the God code, the source code comes out. Why? Because infinite Unam means everything is interlinked, infinitely connected. So Unam implies a continuum, a continuum. Unam is a continuum. It means reality. This is the ground floor of reality. Reality, being, is, if you call it infinite, in the beginning is the word, then it's Unam, infinite word. What does that mean? It's connected with everything else. So it's not like word here. Word is different from consciousness or thought. I use words and I picture words as picturing and referring and describing the world out there. Here's the world. Here's my psyche. And here's my thought space and my language and my rational space. And I describe the facts out there in the world. And all of this is my reality. It gets messy really fast. Because my internal mental states and the external facts that I encounter and my culture and the many different cultures out there in the marketplace that impinge upon one another in the public civic space and the political space of my life and my culture, all of it, this is all part of my reality, the human condition. And what happens in this technology, what we call the motherboard, that's a smother board because it smothers off and cuts us off from a deeper access to ourselves and each other and the world and nature. It gets smothered and packaged. And so the best that language can do here is talk about it. It's a layer. It's laid upon reality. It's an abstraction. It's a reduction. It's an objectification. There are different ways of putting it. So what we suggested, and this is really the main point, 2 or 3 main points we like in this meditation to get from source science. That stay with me, please. The Unam, the infinite Unam, means all is connected. And not just connected in the way that things may be linked here. We know how to link. We can link space and time and color and figure and motion and texture. We can link mathematics and physics and economics, and we can make links. There's no question we can make links, single bracket links, but it's not the same as double bracket Unam links. Why? Because Unam links are primary, deeply interflow, so that if you put time here, that time is filled because every point in this field is connected with every other point. Everything is fractal. That's what Unam means. Unam means every point touches every other point. Every word touches every other. So the word here is a continuum word. The infinite Unam word. When it's said in different ways, in the beginning is a word. That word is infinite word. It's not like words here. Words here, I didn't write it, but words here are pieces, word pieces. Names, verbs, adjectives, predicates, subject terms, predicate terms, attributes, qualities, categories, classes, all of these in words. And the words are symbols and the picture, and they describe, and that's beautiful, that's great. But when you get into source word, it reveals. The infinite word is, if you say it's in the beginning, is God. If you use God talk, we don't have to use God talk for source science. Source science is equal opportunity. All of our God names have to be coming out of source science, because if Yahweh is tapping the infinite name, and Allah is tapping the infinite name, and Brahman is tapping the infinite name, and Logos is tapping the infinite name, those all names are infinitely unum connected. Because you can't divide the infinite. It's infinitely unum. And that means a continuum. And the continuum is the flow of being. And every word that's separate over here, when you cross into the deep space, the word just opens up and blossoms with boundless fractal power and voltage. So you're going to have to say there's infinity in a grain of sand. There's infinity in every human. Whatever, you could use Om talk. You can't break a piece of Om. Every point in Om is going to be, in the Om sphere, is going to connect omically with everything else because of the Unum axiom, the Unum power. And the Unum is not unity versus plurality. Unum is pluribus. It's filled with all possibilities. All possible narratives, all possible worldviews, all possible scriptures, all possible arts and sciences, all possible histories and events and evolutions are going to come out of the infinite Unum pluribus and source science. So that what we're left with in the last meditation is to say, wow, if we could use source science then and use the Unum power and continuum and go into the discontinuum, that's what we should see. When we're here in our everyday cultural life of the smother board, this mental program is technology that names and separates and gives us names and gives us a capacity to handle. We can't handle this voltage, so we take a derivative attempt in our human evolution over eons to get to word power here, which is not the same as word power here. We're using a code here, which is not the same as a double bracket Unum pluribus code. The code in which all things are situated within the infinite field, and therefore infinitely connected in the infinite Unum. So the infinite Unum, when we just follow the science and source science, and this is echoed in our great theologies and scriptures, in the beginning is infinite Unum, the infinite word. Or you can say in being. Or you could say in the beginning is Logos. Or in the beginning is Om. Whatever we say, the beginning is love. The beginning is awareness. We could say that because infinite Unum has infinite words, infinite names. We could say being. If we say God is love, or being is love, or awareness is time, or infinite knowledge, omniscience, all-knowing. These words are very powerful. When we say the beginning is love, it means that the infinite force is so connected and flowing in a deep orchestration and music and harmony and coherence and connectivity that is love. It is goodness. Unum is good, goodness. Plato was saying in the Republic that when we get to the deepest level of wisdom, the source of reason, and tap the rational light of Logos, it is infinite good. It's goodness. Deeper than knowledge and truth, it's goodness. So much in history has been going on here to find what is a name, what are the deep primal names of source science, of the Logos code. And the main lesson that we should have gotten, the takeaway from last time, source science, we see as a continuum. The Unum continuum of all connectivity and sourcing all. It means that this code is in any word, any event, any experience, any feelings, any emotions, whatever that we have, any science, any art, any discipline is going to be coded with the Unum code. That's source science. And that means if we take a look at any phenomenon here, like any human disorder or pathology, we're going to see it from the local lens here, and to try to make sense of it here within this medicine. Medicine here to diagnose our human breakdowns and pathologies and dysfunctions in this. But when you get to source science, you begin to see it from the Unum connection, and what begins to become clear, and that was really what struck us last time, that is astounding, is that all of our vast, diverse breakdowns in human life, in the human condition, from being desourced. This is the primary medical, ontological diagnostic. This is well-being, this is ill-being. Whatever we're doing here. Normal life here is ill-being. If we're located and colonized by the information technologies that talks about it and breaks it into pieces and objectifies. Consciousness here uses the screen, and we have the objects of thought and feelings and emotions, the content that shows up and is objectified. We see the other person that way, we see ourselves that way, and therefore we objectify. So this technology objectifies. When we objectify, we're cut from the source, because here everything is interflow. This has gotten very cluttered very quickly. And maybe if we look back at the prior page, before we turn, just to get some breathing room. This was part of our last meditation. And I'm going back to review a little bit. Unum pluribus, the logos code, the I and the other is connected. This is a high epistemology space. Epistemology means the place of knowing, cognition, encountering the other. How does the subject encounter the other? Not as an object that's objectified, but an other subject, intersubjectivity. The other is also speaking to me as I speak to it, and we show up and we mirror each other in that dialogue. That's deep dialogue. Dialogue is dialogos. This is monologue when I have my lens and I look at the object. And the reason I'm bringing that out is that we don't see this. And we're good people. And we don't mean to objectify ourselves and others, because we know from ethics that we don't want to objectify another human being, treat her as an object, or the child as an object, or the other person in another culture as an object. Because when you objectify nature, if you try to objectify nature, it's not a far step to say, well, I can use the forest, I can use the resources of nature for my wishes and my needs and my intentions. Objectification, which comes from being desourced, breeds all kind of pathologies. Holocausts, genocides, racism, sexism, homophobia, fear of the other, violence to the other. So we begin to see that using this technology, as great as it may give us control of the word and information, and it's great to have information, and our whole digital age, we can Google it. But you can't Google source, you can't Google God. You can't Google love. You can't Google I, thou. It's beyond Google. This is important. You can't Google yoga. You can talk about it, of course, but that's a problem. You're talking about it. You're informationizing it. You're making it into a product, into a commodity, into an entity. You're objectifying it. And when you objectify, you're cutting it off and you're reducing it. If you took the object here and you put it here, you reduced it. If you take yourself here and you put yourself here, you've reduced it. You've dehumanized yourself. This is a human space. And using this technology objectifies and dehumanizes. So when people often say we're living in a material world, that's not really the best diagnostic of it. Materialism, it's deeper than that. It is a smotherboard that's creating the object, and even my spiritual life here can be distorted. I could be living a spiritual practice or religious practice in this space, and it's holding me back from going into deep, authentic spirituality and deep, authentic religious life and deep political life and deep scientific life, because this is the powerful way to know, to be right in the source of reality and encounter the other. So if I'm encountering phenomena here with my lens, it's cut off and it's blocked. I'm not getting the deep phenomena. And philosophers speak of noumena, what really is, the thing as it is, and the phenomena, how it appears to us. And it appears to us because of our lens. So it's been said in philosophy that we can only know what's in our lens, and therefore we can only know what appears. So phenomena is what appears on the screen of my inner feelings and my outer perceptions and the events I'm involved in. That's phenomena. Phenomena is appearances, and the world is made up of all of the phenomena. But the phenomena is under my lens that I interpret, because you've got to process it. And if we're in different cultures, we have different phenomena. If one sees a dead stone because she's using one kind of lens of material physics, or nature is dead matter, that's going to be a different lens than someone who's living a spiritualized life and sees a spirit is all through nature, and the earth is alive and filled with spirit. So it's, the phenomena will appear differently here. So what is empirical, namely experience, what shows up for us as real, empirically, in our perceptions, and processing of the world will shift across worlds. We'll have different phenomena showing up. What is showing up for one will not show up for the other because of the different lenses we're using. As when we shift scientific theories from Newton to Einstein, we're shifting what appears. But here, what appears here, that's the question. Source science is when you go deeper into allow the other to show up and you allow yourself to open up, to tap the source of the flow of the infinite pluribus. And that's deep knowing. That's deep science. And that's deep reason. That's the Logos code, the missing source code that our great teachers are calling us into primary being. When you enter this space, this sacred space, and I am, when you're I aming, you're not talking about it. You're not describing something. You're not using information. You're embodying it. You're manifesting it. You're showing it. You're revealing it. You're performing it. You're occupying it. You have to occupy being. As the runner who is the running, she is the running when she's running. She's not talking I am running. It's not a property that she's doing, an activity or a verb that applies I am running. She be running. This is the place of being and primary being. All of our activities are like that. That's why the Zen teaching is that when you chop wood, chop wood. When you carry water, carry water. When you sit, sit. When you walk, walk. When you eat, eat. When you love, love. In this space, all of the call from this level of thinking and reason and processing and making sense and manufacturing our truths and our narratives and our stories is being called to a higher ground. So we went over this last time, and what from this source science and this way of knowing, and then diagnostic here, and saying, wow, look at the human condition. And I'm suggesting that a vast range, every aspect we turn in our cultural lives here in the D-source. If you're D-source, you're in trouble. Your being is broken. You're alienated from being. If your being is broken and fragmented, then you're going to suffer. And we can do medical science and diagnose. We know something is wrong. We have many names for it. We can speak of there's racism and sexism and homophobia and violence to other humans and objectification of humans and on and on. There's stress. And there's a life crisis, and there's psychiatric disorders and psychotherapeutic diagnostic and medical diagnostic of stress-related disorders. And it's brilliant what's gone on here so far within these limits under this motherboard. But when you go into deep science, medical ontology, and see, let's look at from the missing source code, where everything is unum connected in flow. Now we've got the code at the deepest level of being. We've got the DNA for primary being. And I want to move my life into this space, my culture, my worship, my science, my art, my love relationship, my family, my children. I want to raise them in the high culture. So what we're suggesting in the last meditation is that to be cut off is the main primary headlines. And now just look from source medical into our human condition. And here we feel like victim. We feel this is the way it is. That's the way life is. We're only human. That's it. I guess that's the way people are. Okay, there is terrorism. Well, that's part of the world. It's terrorism. Right? And people are racist. Some people, yeah, they're racist. I don't have to be racist. They're racist. And the sex, people are objectifying women. And misogyny, well, that's, people are ignorant, and we try to make sense of, and we know that these things are malpractice and dysfunctional. So one of the main medical ontology points I was making is that if you slow down, let's slow down, and begin to look at different places in our cultural lives and see, well, there's stress going on. I'm suffering from stress, and I want to use mindfulness meditation to de-stress because I'm getting medical effects from stress. It's not good for my health, the stress. And now medical schools are beginning to see that, and life on campus, is that we need mindfulness to really de-stress, because stress is really having very harmful effects on my performance, on my thriving, on my physical well-being. And so what is mindfulness stress reduction? Well, stress is caused by living in the distress zone. The desource zone is a stress zone. And how do you solve the problem of stress? Existential stress. I feel the crunch of time. I feel the limits of money in the economic stress spaces of my life. For example, I feel psychological stress in the relationship that I'm in my family life, and my workplace. It's deeply stressful with a clash of different perspectives and ideologies and personalities, and that causes a lot of stress. So is stress related to being cut off and desourced? Yes. And why would the Buddha way overcome stress? Well, that's the whole point, because when you go into the space of well-being and flow and into the Dharma of awakened consciousness and love and compassion and harmony, it solves the medical issue of stress. For example, I'm just giving examples. How about a breakdown in the civic space of democracy? I'm just looking at random. Let's look at the civic space of democracy. Take the Americans. We could go anywhere on the planet. We could go to Russia. We could go to Asia. We can go to Africa. We can go to South America. We can go to Canada, America. Wherever we go on the planet, look at the cultures. Wherever they are, people are in breakdowns of different perspectives and cultural world. Cultures are clashing. Religions are clashing. Ideologies are clashing. There's terrorism. And there's been if you look back at the history, it's abysmal. The Holocaust and genocides and ethnic cleansing and racism and the objectification and slavery of other people. Where does that come from? We're suggesting medically, when you see it, the way the great teachers and first scientists, first ontologists have seen it, is that when you lose that connection with the source, with love, with the flow, with yourself, when you slice yourself with this technology, you are in a medical condition that's going to generate all kinds of disorders. When you're sliced, when you're using a slasher, the single bracket is called that because it's a slasher. It slashes, it cuts, it puts everything in its polarized space. It cuts our world, it cuts our religions. It doesn't understand interflow. Interflow is a powerful medicine. Love is medicine. Medical love, which is what? To feel and experience a connection with nature, with the other, with your lover, with your children, with other religions, with other faiths, with other perspectives, and other disciplines. Whatever the other is not an alien and creates a phobic response. Because when that happens, when we objectify, it doesn't take long in the clash of positions and self-interest for there to be enslavement and colonizing and using and objectifying as if it's property and treating others as if they're objects. Objectifying is a deep illness in the human condition culturally. And it comes with the slasher. The slashing information, we haven't seen it. What are the ontological medical consequences of using this technology and level of development of word process? Can we be moral? Can we be spiritual? Can we be religious? Can we be scientific? Can we raise our kids in liberal education, liberal arts? If we're doing education here with the slasher, can we really find the educational connectivity and flow and the rational space of the arts and sciences? And to raise our children with the intelligence, rational logos intelligence, to honor self and other in non-violence. This is non-violent. This is inherently violent. That's the slasher. It cuts off. How do we solve? So just putting it in traditional terms of East and West, if we use the language of sin, sin is being cut off from being. Samsara, being cut off from being. If sin and samsara, let's call it sinsara. Let's join those two words from a global lens, because they're pointing to the same diagnostic in different ways from different sides. Sin here, samsara here. If that's so, and human suffering is caused by samsara, which is what? The dominance of the samsara code, the sin code. Sin is a code, a culture code. It's not just being bad here. The fall from grace to get the technology of the tree of knowledge and the object of the fruit of knowledge, not wisdom, came at the price of being under the sway of a deep implant. And when I suggested last time that this is, the great teachers saw that this is like a form of being colonized. Socrates, we're living in a cave and we have to come into the logos to know thyself and be thyself and have wisdom in the culture. You can't be in the cave. So the metaphor of the cave, or the bondage of samsara, or the separation of sin, whatever name we're using, it's not that it's not been seen. Something is wrong here. How do you solve medically? How do you solve the sin problem? I'm asking us. Out of the Judaic, Christian, Muslim tradition of the children of Abraham, of the call of God, to put God first. How do we solve the problem of sin if we're cut off from grace, from faith, from knowledge, from truth and love and dialogue? We can't do it from here. We can't do it within here because that's the problem. That's the irony and the paradox we're facing. When we're in the sin zone, the samsara zone, and using a deeply implanted technology to make our lives, and we find the medical fallout is enormous wherever we turn. If persons begin to feel a midlife crisis and say, this meaning is not, my life has no meaning. Well, that's actually medically correct, because meaning here is not the same as meaning here. When you get to real meaning, when the lights go on and you tap the logos and you awaken yourself and you're flowing in the zone and you're entering primary being, then you have meaning. You are meaning. And what is meaning? Truth and meaning come together. That's why Jesus said, I am the truth, I am the word, I'm the life. And that is a life. It's a life force. And if the life force is cut off, you're going to starve. And you're going to feel it in all kinds of ways. And people do. So when someone is feeling suicidal thoughts and says, I want out of here. I want out. If this is my life, I want out. Right? But in a way, ironically, wanting out of this, if you don't know the alternative, then it looks like suicide is the only answer. And that's why Camus would say the question, if the lights are out and this absurd, and there is no meaning, which existentialist philosophers are beginning to say, if there is no meaning, there's no meaning in everyday life and culture. If it's absurd and meaningless, why live? Why should I be? Because being here is pointless. Well, that's samsara. Samsara is, it's pointless. It makes no sense. It repeats itself. As Jean-Paul said, it's ennui. It repeats. The myth of Sisyphus, it just keeps going and it's pointless. So what's the raison d'être? What's the reason to be? And that, when the lights go out, it's terrible. Facing death is an ontological issue. What does death mean? Well, the phenomenon of death here seems to be scary, and we live and haunted by the fact, I'm going to die. We're going to die. The lights go out. Your being is over. Whereas to live in this zone, the great teachers saw. That's what salvation is and resurrection. Jesus is saying, I am the life, eternal life. So if you are a genuine Christian living in the Christ code, you know everlasting life. If you're Buddha and you're mindful, and Buddha said, this is like death and this is life. So when you enter the Buddha zone, you overcome death. Death comes out of here. Death comes from the slasher. So in our everyday lives, you can have all kinds of ways of facing the death and the agony of the blades of the slasher, cutting ourselves off from ourselves, is going to show up medically. But we don't have the words and the language and the lens and the science to name it and see it and say, oh, that's my problem. That's why my life is collapsing in midlife. That's why I'm feeling emptiness and nihilism and all of our opinions. There's no fundamental truth. All of these different worlds in the marketplace, all vying for the right story and all claiming first rights for their truth. And we're duking it out between each other. And then out there, all of the violence of terrorism and the clash of worlds and the abysmal violence taking place in this space is hellish. So wherever we look in our cultural life and take any of the words we might say politics, well, look at the civic space. What's going on? A clash of perspectives. And we're not getting it together. And it's power plays in the marketplace. There is no we the people. There is no dialogue. There's dominance of monologue. Each lens, each story is claiming that it's the right way to see things. And we don't know how to dialogue. So a healthy democracy, demos, we the people, humans, awaken people in rational light, in a real democracy, can dialogue in diversity. The pluribus, healthy pluribus, is beautiful. Diversity is fantastic and is honored. We honor the other. But here, there's a breakdown. And so monologue breaks the circuits of a civic space and civil behavior in the marketplace of civic life. What's said about being desourced? Why? Because we've lost the tools of deep dialogue, unum pluribus tools and technologies to be able to be non-violent together and face diversity in a healthy way. If we want to seek diversity here and it becomes pluribus, that's broken apart, there's no community, there's no unum. It falls apart. Just raw diversity and difference without unity collapses. Enforced unity without diversity collapses. But unum pluribus is so deep, the unum, the community, the communitas, the polis, that it welcomes boundless diversity because it knows it has a resource. Unum has a resource to handle boundless diversity, boundless alternative narrative worldviews, disciplinary orientations, gender orientations, sexual orientations, on. Diversity can be handled in a non-violent way. And it's not a matter of tolerating the other, but embracing your other. Love even your enemy, love as yourself. Why? That's the law of the unum pluribus. I know I'm going fast, and because I'm trying to help us go before we end this session. What I'm trying to help us do, we'll turn the page in a moment and in a way start over. But what I'd like us to think about is that it's not only that wherever we look in our lives, our family life, there's a breakdown of communication. In our marriage, there can be a crack because we can't really encounter each other in a dialogue, noble, healthy, dignified, loving fashion because of the boundaries of our lives and the lenses that dominate in the monologue. Monologue dominates here, and where there's monologue, wherever we look at human relations, including my relations with myself, because I can be, as I said before, I can be living multiple worldviews in some multiple lenses in my complex, pluralistic inner life, and I don't know how to get it together, because here you can't get it together. You don't have the tools of continuum. The source being flows in a continuum. Here it's a discontinuum. And the theme I'm trying to sound medically, when we look at the broken being and the fragmentation of ourself and disintegration of the self, when humans are disintegrated and broken across borders of all kinds, inner borders and external borders, it borders on insanity. It leads to violence. It leads to the failure of having compassion and honor and respect and being whole persons. Broken persons are going to have broken cultures. So one of the great formulas and axioms of source science is that we are as we mind. If we mind with this technology, our being is going to be desourced. It's going to be smothered. If you mind with a smotherboard, you're going to have a smotherboard life. And wherever you look at addictions. Why are so many people suffering from addiction? Medical science and AA meetings will have a strategy. So you've got to surrender to a higher power. And the 12 steps of trying to really diagnose and help people with addictions here. We have many retreat centers around the planet that are trying to help people overcome the traumas of addiction and how it destroys your life. Whatever the substance abuse. But ask, why are people turning to alcohol or other substances to and become addicted to it? And source science would say because Buddha said it, we're addicted. This is a source of addiction. The implant of the single bracket technology is so deep, and it empowers us to see and to have meaning and to have a will. This is a very important point I'm bringing out. My agency and my will and my capacity to do and make choices in here is highly compromised. Choice here is much deeper. This is freedom, free choice. Agency, to be an agent, a free agent, comes with the source code. That's why all of these great traditions says this is freedom. The yoga, moksha, freedom. Buddha, freedom. The Buddha field is freedom. Kant, when we have the moral law, when we're one with the imperative, the rational law of ethics, that's autonomy, that's freedom. Not here in the box. Freedom is not here. So when we raised the theme last time, that culture here is colonized. Why? Because the greatest thing for humans are free choice. If you want to be pro-choice, you better be pro-source. Why? Because if your life is under the jurisdiction of the smother board, and that gives you your options are here within the space, and that's your single bracket choice, is not the same as double bracket freedom. Choice. Because we have a choice as to whether we're going to live here or here. That was Buddha's third axiom. Existence is suffering. It has a cause. Addiction to a pattern that we don't realize is breaking us down and causing human suffering. Third axiom, we have a choice. Source science. It's not a choice inside here. Within the colonized space, our choice is highly limited. We're still imprisoned. But when you step back out of this and break the shackles of this mind program that dominates our lives, then we begin to have a choice, okay, here or here. And in a way, the epic of a fall, the biblical fall, is we were in grace and we chose to do that. We used our choice power to choose that, and it trapped us in sin. That's the fall. It's a malpractice of choice, and therefore the loss of freedom and agency. And that means if we're living our culture here, if America is living in this space, then we're not the land of the free and the home of the brave. Because slavery, deeper colonized slavery, is being mentally trapped by a program that holds us in the objectified space, and the objectification which cuts us off from source generates all kinds of human pathologies, cultural pathologies. So our quest for genuine meaning and truth and goodness and life and happiness and well-being is here. And so if we're living here in this cave, it's going to show up in all kinds of ways. So suicidal thoughts, midlife crisis, nihilism, sophistry, that it's all opinion. I'm cut off from the ground of truth. So can I trust my knowledge? Is science the ultimate knowledge? Or is it the wisdom of being in the source science? So that from a point of view of science and epistemology, then can we have more than opinion here? Whose lens is going to dominate the space? The narrative space is the real truth, the ultimate truth. If we absolutize our lens, we have absolutism. If we relativize it, we have relativism. And both are flip sides of the same disorder. Absolutism, one lens win, one worldview, one truth. Is it God? Is it Jesus? Is it Allah? Is it science? Who has the ultimate right lens? The right story, the right narrative. That's absolutism. To absolutize the space and claim this is the winning story and the ultimate truth. Or if you say there are many truths, every culture, every perspective, every ideology has its way of seeing, and we have to open up the pluralism. Not the pluribus, but the pluralism. Each has its own separate truth, and we shatter into relativism, and there is no fundamental truth. And if there's no fundamental truth, we're in trouble. So it shows up politically, it shows up in our family lives, in our inner psychic life, intercultural, the wars between cultures, interreligious, religious wars, the clash of worldviews. It goes on and on and on. And what I'm suggesting in this meditative exploration is that to see and feel how so many diverse pathologies that we didn't realize. Obviously, sexism has to do with objectification and the ill will. And if my will here, free will, healthy will, the moral will, in source science, a rational will, the logos will, is here, then this will is going to have ill will. Even good people are going to be trapped in this place. And this is the main point, because my power to make choices and have agency is inscribed within a colonized space. It's deeper than my will. This is pre-conscious. The program of information technology, of talking about it and processing our language and our world and our reason, am I making sense and truth and all of my ideologies and narratives and paradigms and stories are inscribed here. It blocks a deeper power of choice. The choice to move here. And it's not a choice that the ego-centered, monocentric human can make. You can't choose to be enlightened. You've got to let go of a technology that's blocking your choice so that you can rise into the zone. If an athlete tries to will her way into the zone, it doesn't work. It's when you stop that kind of ill-willing, pathological willing, a limited colonized will. When you stop willing, then a higher will, an agency, and she becomes a runner in peak performance. And the artist performs in the highest possible way when you step out of the way. Which is what we're trying to illustrate in this messy picture, to step out of the way and let yourself open up into the zone. Well, maybe we don't even need to turn and start a new page over. And you probably are shaking your head and saying, no way, I'm not going to go for another page. It's too much. So let's breathe for a moment and just collect ourselves and focus in on the concluding theme of this meditation. If with source eyes and source lens and medical ontology, we can look more deeply into our everyday cultural lives and the human condition and see with deeper diagnostic eyes the fragmentation, the inherent endemic fragmentation that comes from the motherboard that we can't see yet, and we have to see. And that the greatest healing is to come to be able to see the smotherboard that's controlling our lives and our cultural space, which is going on here, and ask, how do we move and upgrade into the source life, into the well-being, into the human flourishing, into the love space, into the moral, ethical, rational space of deep knowing and deep faith. How do we make that transition? Excuse me. And I've been suggesting that all of our great spiritual traditions have been developing strategies to see this somehow and to know something is wrong here, and we can overcome it by letting go of something here and crossing into the yoga space and the Christ space and the Buddha space and the Socrates, your logos space, to make that crossing. And what I'm suggesting is that's new. We can see, now that we've had all of these great traditions, we can step back and see, wow, there's a code, there's a logic, there's a science, a source science. And now maybe with the source science, we could use this to help us, the mass public, the mass culture, those who are ready to become aware of that there's a mind operating program, a process that is ruling our lives in a way and holding us captive in a space. And our great teachers, we've not been able to tap the medicine here because we tried to download the medicine here. So if the pathologies of human life that comes from being desourced are everywhere return, and it has to do with objectification and fragmentation and the loss of the unum continuum that heals us, that's the medicine. If democracy is not sustainable, if our family life is broken, if our love life and our marriage is not working because of the clash of monocentric, we've got mono. What is that? Mono lens, not dialogue. Monologue is not dialogue. We need dialogue medicine to make our human relations work, our civic space heal, our United Nations flow, our diplomacy, our peacemaking, to create a world space, a planetary space, where our different worlds and perspectives and ways of life and orientations can flourish in sacred space. This is sacred space. How do we cross from desecrated space to sacred space? From colonized space to free space? From pre-rational space to rational space? That is the urgent crisis, the invisible crisis that we've been tracing for these 12 meditations. And so I'd like to, in this journey, to sum up and leave some questions for us to think about. Because when we look at all the strategies here within this space, imagine all of, if we want, we're stressing, we know our life is empty, we know that we're having a midlife crisis, we know we can do better. I want to go to love, I want to get out of fear, I want to get out of anxiety and existential angst and the fear of death, on and on. I want a solution. And so we have coaches that are helping us face death better. Face the aging. We're aging badly. How do we stop the aging? Well, we're getting coaches to help us stop aging. You don't have to age that badly. Right? You can stop the stress. Let go of fear and turn to love. Right? Find the power of now. That's what's going to do it for you. Right? But all of these strategies, on and on in the marketplace, we have so many recent, brilliant narratives and coaching and self-help in the marketplace to help us deal with, if you know something is wrong and I want to find the answer. I want to have a spiritual practice. I want to do yoga. But if you're doing yoga here, you're not getting into that space. So your yoga teacher should be saying yoga is a technology of calling out the motherboard so that you can cross into the Om and flourish in yourself. Your yoga practice should bring you here. Whatever your spiritual practice, it should bring you here. If you're following the Buddha teaching, then Buddha is precisely saying, enter the Buddha space. And therefore you've got to call this out. If you're living a religious life, and you're reading the scriptures here, maybe you're missing the power and the depth of the Word of God, the Word of Source, the infinite Word, and the scripture here, when it was embodied, say, in Jesus, when Moses is at the burning bush and dialogue with God, the Source, it's saying, I am the way, I am. I am that I am, the I am. What is I am? It's the infinite awareness. Primary being, when you get to source science, what do you discover? That the infinite source is infinite awareness. It can't be finite. This is ABC, basic ontology. The infinite is infinite through and through in every way. Good, infinite good. Love, infinite love. Name, infinite name. Word, infinite word. Being, infinite being. Unity, infinite unity. Plurality, infinite plurality in unity. So being here is objectified. And if your scripture and you're reading the Gospels or the scriptures here is news, I'll tell you the good news, and you're believing in God or Jesus or Muhammad or Quran or Allah or Buddha or yoga, whatever you're doing here, if you're doing it under the sway of the colonized space, you're not getting it. You're not getting the medicine. Because I think we'd all agree, if we look back and stand back and look at our great teachers calling us to high culture, to compassion, to love, to ethics, to mutual respect, to being in sacred space, that nature is sacred, that every breath is a miracle, that the fact that we can see is a miracle, and we're always in the source. So the infinite una means infinite presence. God can't be far away. If you can use God talk, the infinite cannot be far away. It's infinitely here. So every point is infinite presence. And if we can handle that, then it becomes a sacred life. And our bodies are sacred. And matter is sacred. And nature is sacred. And our flow with our environment and our lives and with each other on the sacred earth is a different form of life. And if we had been doing that, we would be there. We're not there. Let's say we've had 2,500 years of great scriptures and medicine from this space, calling us to this space, but we're still apparently very much here. It's not that we don't have moments of tapping into the zone. We know we can tap the zone. We have high moments that we can channel. We have channelers who can really see into this and tell us about it. But that's the problem. To channel information here, to get the wisdom and channel the spirituality into this space blows it. Because genuine spirituality and wisdom in scripture is saying, get out of this space, overcome that, let it go, have the discipline and the technology and the practices to take you across this barrier into the source space. And if we had tapped that medicine over the last 2,000 years, we would be a different culture than we are now on the planet. So what's blocking it? Why aren't we getting the real power of the Word of God, the Word of Allah, the Word of Yahweh, the Word of Christ, the Word of Buddha, the Word of yoga, of Om, of Brahman, of Atman, of Tao? Why aren't we getting the power of that medicine? Because we're held back, we're hitting a boundary, and we need to make a crossing. And to make the crossing, you got to see it and call it out because it's dominating and holding us captive. And that has not been seen. That's new. We need to see that. So I just invite us in closing this meditation with a thought of the urgency of our pathologies that are cut from being desourced. And the main point is, how do we become resourced? How do we cross? How do we do the yoga? How do we do the Christ? To love Christ here, to love, enter the Word of God, to follow Moses and Abraham, to follow Muhammad and Quran, to follow all of our great scriptures, and to follow the trail of our great philosophies through the centuries. In the next meditation, I'm going to take a moment to help us see that if you start with Plato, Socrates, Aristotle, Parmenides, Heraclitus in the Greek tradition, and you follow the trail, fast forward, all the way through the centuries, picking it up from Augustine, Aquinas, and the Arabic philosophers, and you're going to Locke, Berkeley, Hume, Descartes, Spinoza, Leibniz, Kant, Hegel, Nietzsche, and into the 20th century with Sartre and Heidegger and Frege and Wittgenstein and Jacques Derrida and Russell and Whitehead and all of these great geniuses, and you come to the edge, they're all trying to get us into the being. Heidegger in his mature philosophy is saying that I want you to have an experience with the word. We're still not there. We're on our way to language. That's one of the titles, On the Way to Language, On the Way to Being. The Gelassenheit and Open It Up and Aletheia and meditative. He says we're meditative beings and the technology can hold us back. This technology can hold us back, and if we lose this, we lose everything. Heidegger, for example, if we follow the Buddha trail 2,500 years into modern Zen, you will see the great attempt to get over this. If you look at the yoga tradition, centuries all the way into Aurobindo in the 20th century, still struggling to overcome and cross into the space of Atman. What's going on? If you follow the Christ story all the way through the Catholic, the Protestant Revolution, the Quaker founding, and you bring the Quaker, what's driving that? What's moving us from Abraham to Moses to Jesus, Muhammad, and on, all the way through? It is the source calling us. The deep, missing evolutionary story of our human journey is the infinite source is calling us because we're coded, we're Logos Sapiens, and it's been calling us to awaken into the source life. And I would love to share a story with you of looking at these great traditions, 2,500 years of Buddha, 2,500 years of yoga, 2,500 years of the Logos tradition, of the European tradition unfolding into modern science, bringing us to where we are. And we're knocking at the door of crossing into the source code, into the zone, into being, into deep science, into the unified field, into compassion, into the space of America. The journey of the emergence of the blossoming of America here and crossing into the sacred civic space of democracy. The right to life, liberty, well-being. Just to use that one example. So I leave us with this thought to close this meditation. Whatever space you occupy in your life, and I'm sure you find meaning, there's no question. I'm not saying that there isn't a before and after here. There's a profound before and after. There's a great sense of progress. My life before and after. Before I discovered Jesus, and Jesus spoke to me, my life was in the dark, but I saw the light. Jesus, hallelujah. Before I did yoga, I was falling apart. I was living in stress. And I started to do yoga, and my life cleaned up, and I'm also doing Pilates and physical fitness, and I discovered organic eating, and now my diet is clear, and I kicked the alcohol with the 12-step program, and my life has gotten so much better. And I'm reading certain books, wisdom books, and enlightenment books, and they're making me have a much more deep understanding of wisdom. I got the wisdom. I'm getting the enlightenment. My teachers are giving me what enlightenment is. I'm getting such amazing things I'm doing in my practice. That is fantastic. There are before and after here, but if it's still inscribed within the space, and our teachers are not saying, folks, step back and listen to the genius of our great teachers and realize that there is a mind operating process that's so deep in our human development and level of development, that it's whatever it empowers us to do and to see and to have meaning and truth and narratives and better lives. If it's inscribed and colonized, it's not going to flourish in the way that we must, and it's a crisis for us. Not calling out this motherboard and developing strategies to go into the real motherboard, the source board, is the greatest crisis facing the human condition at every level of our lives. It's time for us to call it out and medically get to the source of our fragmentation, polarization, and extreme endemic violence that's breaking us apart and deeply violating our kids. They can't flourish in that space and in that culture and that educational structure that is inscribing the single bracket information technologies rather than the human space of sacred interconnectivity. This is educable. This is education. Education, genuine education, is not going to give us more information and narratives and disciplinary narratives and inventory of our different theories and so forth. That's great. That's important. Information is vital. And all of our religious practices and spiritual practices and creative work, whatever we've done, all the great advances in America from our founding with slavery and letting go of slavery, and women can vote, and now gays have rights, and with civil rights, stop the apartheid and segregation in the American story, and all people are free, and we want economic justice. That journey is great, and it's happening in steps, but it's because all of our great advances are the call of the source. It's calling us ever deeper to make a crossing into the land of the free. Just to use that example, for all of us. For the United Nations to become an unum nations with a pluribus. European Union, United States, not the United Colonies in the colonized space, but united people in the unum pluribus. Across the planet, in every continent, in every culture, in every habitat. If we're living in this space without knowing it, it's time to face it and call it out and see it and really see the consequences of being desourced. It's devastating. This is tribal in the sense of localized, tribal thinking, localized thinking, rather than global intelligence and open up. And what's the point? Well, source is global. If you use God talk, God is global. What does global mean? All possible words. Global means infinitely sourcing all that there is. That's God. Yahweh, yes. Allah, yes. Brahman, yes. Buddha nature, not God talk, but yeah, the fundamental field, yes. Infinite, the deepest physics of cosmology, of the unified field, when we get there, you can't get the unified field of physics here because this is a disintegral, disunified, fragmenting, discontinuum technology. Physics here is going to be not tapping the unified field of non-locality and the butterfly effect and the black holes and physics is at the edge of trying to peek into nature and the cosmos and the laws of nature and the laws of physics in that space. Brilliant. This is going to happen. It needs the double bracket technology to open up the physics. For example, medicine. If medicine, we're using medical science, as brilliant as it is to diagnose the ailments, the physical and mental and the psychosomatic illness here, imagine what medicine would be if you got source medicine. And every advance of humanity is a gift of the source. I hope we get that. It's not that the monocentric people are doing it. The internet, the MRIs, all of the technologies of medical science, the capacity to go into deep into space, into Mars and the moon, all of that, flight and jets, and all of the technologies of energy so far, it's all tapping the source. Nothing can happen without the source funding it and making it possible. It's not that we take credit for it, but the source is always operating on us at every moment. So to end this meditation, I ask a question to all of us, and me, all of us. we must ask, am I living under the influence of the single bracket space? Is that where my cultural life and my own personal life and family life and civic life and professional life, is that where I'm living? Because if we are, we need to really call it out and look at it. At least if we say, I see it and I want it, I want to live in the single bracket space, thank you very much. If that's your attitude, your choice. But make the choice. Don't be victim. Don't be a victim and say, that's the way it is. That's the way the world is. Or you might say in your spiritual practice, like, I'm okay and you're okay. That's, what are you building? Let it be. Everything's cool. Everything's fine. It's just as it is. It's where it should be. Everything is as it is. If you're speaking that way in your spiritual language, you may be blowing it because that's a different language in here, which is be here now. If you want the power of now, you're not going to find it here in single bracket time. You're going to find it in double bracket now power. Now power is here. Double bracket time. Source time. That's when the great wisdom teachers for centuries, with great discipline and science, saying be here now. Here, space, infinite space. Time, now. Be, being. Be here now. The continuum showing up in the zone. So whatever wisdom story you are embracing, if the wisdom is here, a story, you're getting a story, and even leaders say, change your story. We need a new story. Well, the story changing in here is still not the new story. That's as old as the hills. A new narrative, a new paradigm, a paradigm shift is not a shift into this place. That's the real shift. Wisdom is not information in the box. Wisdom is crossing into the space of being and love and compassion and intelligence and embodiment of sacred space. Wisdom is here. Wisdom is transformational, transinformational. If you're using informational wisdom, you're trapped. If you're using enlightenment and talking about enlightenment, you're not enlightened. If you're speaking of the Word of God and your Word of God is here, then it's not the Word of God, the Word of Source. Because God is global. That's a no-brainer. I mean, to say, if your God is the infinite spirit and it's over there, no, it can't be over there. It's got to be infinitely here. It can't be over there. That violates the basic law of the infinite. That's why religious, spiritual mystics and others have seen there's God in every person. There's God in every grain of sand. There's God in every breath. Turn on to it. But you can't get it with this technology that ungods us, de-gods us. We have to re-God, resource, rezone. Whatever language you use to cross. It doesn't have to be God talk or spiritual talk. It can be basic science. I want deep science, deep ontology. I want the grammar of being. Forget God talk. Forget spirituality. I'm a scientist. Go here and do the science. Be an observant scientist and observe what's around us with open eyes, double bracket, rational, epistemic, ontological power. So we'll close on that in this 12th minute. It went on quite a while. And I want to leave us with this thought to ask each of ourselves, am I living in this motherboard? What does it take for me to see it? Look at this, inventory our lives. Look at our lives with my lover, with my partner, in the workplace, in my civic life, in my political life, in my academic life, wherever I am, wherever we are, in politics, in the economics, in the business world, in the workplace, am I living in a dialogue flow? Am I in sacred dialogue? Or is it a desecrated, hardened, fragmented, polarized across borders space where we're objectifying each other and ourselves in monocentric violence? To objectify each other, to objectify nature, to whatever we objectify, when we objectify whether we like it or not, when we use this, where subject has an object that appears as a phenomenon given to us, and we process ourselves and others and our experience and our lives in this space. Am I living that? Because if you are, and you say, we're starting with the man in the mirror, the woman in the mirror, this mirror or this mirror. If you're starting with the man in the mirror and you're using this mirror and you're inside here, maybe you're not looking at the right mirror, the I-thou mirror in the deep space, and asking him, her, to change her ways. I'm playing on the Michael Jackson song. I'm starting with the man in the mirror. If you want to change the world, you want to make the world a better place, well, this place is not better, and it's trapped, and we have to get out to the higher ground. Martin Luther King, I may not get there with you. I mean, he's envisioning where we have to go, into the promised land, the higher land, the real high noble America, for example. Say that for France, say that for the United Kingdom, say that for Europe and Germany and Russia, and Africa, all across Africa, Asia, South America, all across the planet. We need to get to the high ground. Middle East, we can't solve the peace issue here. We can't force a settlement at Dayton. You've got to go to peace. This is the peace zone. And the land is big enough here. So, how do we sum this up in this meditation? It is that the main event on the planet is to call out the smother board. And whatever spiritual, religious, scientific practice we may have, if we don't do that, we're going to continue to labor within that space. Or please, if you can help the public and others, and yourself and others, show how do you get around that. Or suppose you say there is no smother board. What are you talking about? Right? Then you've got some explaining to do, because the whole history of our great teachers have been calling out some barrier that we've, whether you call it sin or samsara, whatever name you use, you've got to cross a deep barrier to come into awakened life, into compassionate, mature, human, sacred life. And we all need to do that. And each of us has to say, I am, for ourselves. No one can do it for us. So we'll end this meditation with that thought. Whatever wisdom practice or spiritual practice that you might be doing or not doing that is meaningful to you, please ask, am I doing this within the single bracket? Am I doing yoga, if it's yoga, within the space, the un-yoga space? Or am I following real yoga and going into the yoga zone? If I'm following some kind of spiritual practice, whatever it may be, am I doing it here or am I doing it here? That's the question I'd like us to consider. What does it take to call out the motherboard? To see it and to realize it's holding us and to let it go with great discipline and courage and power, because it's scary to make the crossing. That's the final closing thought for this meditation. We'll pick it up and go deeper next time. That it's very scary to let go of the familiar, the normal, and to go into the abnormal, the supernormal, into our destiny as awakened human beings, to go into my high self, the self without this packaging of my story. Can I let go of my story as I've known it and deepen it? It's not to throw it out, but to deepen it. When we cross from here to here, we don't kill it, we upgrade it. And it's scary to upgrade because you enter into the deep space of interconnectivity and interflow. And it can feel as if you're losing your identity. And in a way, you're losing a narrow identity, but you're opening up and gaining a deep identity, a noble, fractal, powerful identity, your real ID. This is a kind of an ID theft. It's not the real ID. That's a great teaching. To get your real ID, who am I? Cross into the source and open it up. That is the ultimate activism on the planet. Any activism here or self-help or strategies that you're using in this space that doesn't call this out and see where you are, you've got to ask, am I here in the deep space of deep dialogue, compassion, and truth, in the primary being of my deep primary self, or am I here cut off and in packages of identity with borders all around me? Because if you're doing your spiritual wisdom practice here, or your religious practice, whatever it is here, something is wrong. It's not what our great teachers are calling us to enter into, make this crossing. Here's a question for all of us. What does it take for me, each of us, to make the crossing into the sacred space of dialogue? In my family life, with my children, with my partners, in my colleagues, in the workplace, with nature, all through my life, with other cultures and politics. What would it take to do that? That's the question I'd like to leave us with in closing this 12th meditation. And if you were able to survive and stay with me, thank you so much. I know it's been intense, and I know I speak with a lot of passion, and I do feel, because it's life and death. I keep saying that at the end of our meditations. To me, this is the future. When I think about the future for our children, especially, and ourselves, with our children, and the next generation, I feel deep passion about this. The ultimate activism is not in the box, it's activision. Real activism is activision, because when we say I am and we dilate and we wake up, and to say I am is to cross into the zone, right? That is when the world changes. If you want to change the world and make a better place, upscript, enter the zone. Have the discipline and courage to hold the space of deep dialogue culture, the ethics of dialogue, I and thou, and enter into nonviolence. That to me is the ultimate challenge in our human journey, emerging for centuries. And the time has come for us now to do this. Thank you very much, and we will continue. We will continue to journey, because there's so much homework to do, so much homework to go deeper into the science, and there's so much more to share with you. So if you're willing, tune in next time with us, join us as our journey continues deeper and deeper into the missing source code and how it affects every aspect of our lives. Thank you so much.